Patrick Riche is the director of sports impacts, a market research and consulting firm with a focus on sports. He's also the associate professor of economics at Walker School of Business at Webster University. Live for us now in Los Angeles. Patrick, good to see you, and thank you for coming on to the show. This is an interesting situation where you have sort of, the second largest economy in one of the biggest economies in the world, and then you have this one of the biggest sporting events in the world kind of colliding at the same time. We've got protests, we've got GDP, we've got the economy. Let's start with the economy first. With or without the World Cup, what's the impact likely to be post-World Cup?
I don't think it's going to be a sustained impact, and my concern is if some of the infrastructure things that have already been reported by the media that are already down there, hotels not being fully completed, stadiums not being completed, concerns that the American soccer players and other players from around the world won't have facilities and toilets to use in some of the facilities. This sends a bad message and makes me worry about the tourism impact between now and their Olympics in Rio in 2016.
I mean, without the World Cup, they had troubles as well. I mean, it's not because of the World Cup that the hotels and stuff are. I mean, that's sort of a byproduct. But even without the World Cup altogether, what's the issue for Brazil's economy?
Well, again, there's so much going on, and I think part of it is you have a nation that is coming into its own, trying to come into its own, had a growth rate of 7% in 2010, has seen slumping growth rates since. So I think you have a country that's trying to become more industrialized, but you have a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of decisions coming from the central government that really create a lot of inefficiencies and also a lot of corruption as well. There's some criticism from the overall media, and we saw this going into the Sochi Olympics as well. People made fun of the hotel rooms, and we kind of had to go at some of the issues. I guess my question is this being accurately portrayed in the media, the problems with the venues, the stadiums, all this stuff? Are we getting it right, the media? It's difficult to say without us being down there. If we look back at Sochi, obviously there were tons of stories and photographs posted on Twitter and Instagram that showed some of the disrepair. And then when the Olympics were over, yes, there were still some complaints, but people seemed to get over it. So we'll see if Brazil is in the same boat. But I will say that one of the issues that is created, why Brazil has had a lot of unrest in the last year, is they have one of the worst income inequality statistics in the world. They're probably 5th or 6th in the world in terms of income inequality. So when you see construction not finishing, when you see healthcare, and when you see airports not being finished, these are the things that get the locals very upset and restless.
Patrick, what about these protests? I mean, we've seen them on and off now for months, and of course this is on the eve of the World Cup, and there's some concern that if these protests get out of control, it's ultimately it will impact the World Cup. And I guess I just want your perspective on this.
Well, again, subway strikes and some other public workers talking about striking during the World Cup as they did during the Confederations Cup last year in Brazil. Again, Philip, my concern is looking ahead in 2 years. There's already people that didn't want to travel to this World Cup because of safety concerns and so forth. If Brazil gets a black eye from hosting this World Cup, what's it going to do to tourism in 2 years for the Olympics?
Let's just say, for example, I'm going to try to think positive. Let's assume the World Cup goes off, no major issues, and it concludes, and everyone's happy. What happens next for the country?
I think what happens next is they need to get their house in order. They need to make good on some of the infrastructure promises that were made when they were awarded these games and the Olympics several years ago. They need to get the health care. They need to get the light rail and the speed rail that they had talked about between Rio and Sao Paulo. They need to fix the airports. These are all things they've got to make progress on, or else people are still going to be upset. Remember, Philip, $11.5 billion to put these games on, and they might see an economic impact of a couple $100 million. Not quite worth it.
Well, first of all, the cost is just an estimate. I mean, we won't know the final cost for much later. We do have a developing story that's happening right before we went on the air here. We got reports that there was some concrete that fell off of a monorail project in Brazil, and that is part of all this construction surrounding the World Cup. And I guess I want your take. How do advertisers and marketers who are preparing for all this, and you're preparing for the crowds, this is a very important infrastructure element of the World Cup. Can they waive it? Can they get over this? I mean, is this something that they can just say, look, we're going to have these little problems, let's expect it?
You have to at this point because it's right on the doorstep. There's not much you can do to turn around at this stage. Obviously, I'm sure the sponsors are going to be down there making demands on the facility officials to try to put their signage on the best way possible. But the games are going to get ratings. The World Cup's going to get ratings, and ultimately that's what the sponsors want to see. What I find more interesting is the fact that we've heard some discussions of corruption for the Qatar World Cup in 2022, and some sponsors are starting to put pressure for an investigation to figure out what's going on at that particular event.
You're talking about Sony, right? Some of the pressure that, just very quickly, since you brought it up, what do you think will likely become the outcome of that situation there?
Who knows? If they uncover some corrupt activity and there were bribes that helped Qatar get the 2022 World Cup, worst case scenario, they could lose it. A lot of people would say that's the best case scenario because a lot of fans in Europe and the Americas don't want to go to Qatar for the 2022 World Cup.
All right. Well, it's still a very exciting event altogether, despite all this controversy and all the issues they're having. Patrick Riche, thank you very much, Director of Sports Impacts, Marketing Research and Consulting Firm. Thank you.